Hey there, colleague. How in the world are you doing? My name is Dave Stewart, and I'm excited to be talking to you today about student motivation. In this session in particular, we're going to focus on what educators tend to miss when it comes to student motivation. And I'll try not to be super overwhelming, but I do want to be comprehensive. The idea is that this could be used as a great hour of PD for a faculty member or an entire faculty that wanted to just dig deep and get a little bit of a refresh on our thinking about student motivation and maybe fix some easy to fix problems that we have. So first, I want to begin with a basic question. Well, I guess let me just quickly introduce myself. The reason I care so much about student motivation is because I'm a family person myself, and because I love my job as a teacher. So, since I'm a family person, that means I don't want to be a workaholic. And the only way for me to actually help my students but not be a workaholic is to help them to be motivated, help them to want to do the work of learning themselves, and really kind of take that on their shoulders, push themselves to achieve their personal best. So, um, that's why I care a lot about student motivation. And really, all of my work, my books that you can see there on the screen, they're all about how do we get the most possible from our work as educators without sacrificing our personal lives on the altar of success. So very important to me, and it's why I care so much about student motivation. And that book there on the far right, that's called The Will to Learn. That is my most recent book, and it's about student motivation. So I think when it comes to motivation, you got to begin with a very simple question. What the heck is school for? What's your class for? What are you trying to accomplish? In my own class, my Everest statement, the top of the mountain statement, what my class is for is that we're trying to become better thinkers, readers, writers, speakers, and people. I've heard some other interesting things from folks. This is a music teacher. Through teaching music and band, I want to help my students become good citizens, kind, responsible problem solvers, hard workers. Here's a teacher in my school teaches Spanish. Miss Holmes, she says, my class is about making an insane amount of errors while trying to make meaning in order to love and understand more people. Every teacher, I think, has a sentence like this in their heart, or, well, they do have that sentence, but some people don't have it in their mind. Some people don't have it clearly defined and remind themselves of it again and again and again. And that's a problem. That's a problem. It'll make your class less efficient. It'll make you more likely to be demotivated, and your students more likely to be demotivated. So definitely have a sentence like this. Okay, I guess there you go. That's one thing that teachers often miss that I wasn't even including on my list when preparing this talk, is that they don't know what the heck their class is for. Another thing that we often miss is what the heck is school for? And school exists to promote the long-term flourishing of young people by helping them master things that outside of school they probably wouldn't master. So, like my children, they have two loving parents, but they're very unlikely to master algebra. I mean, it's just not going to happen apart from school. They're not going to do the types of things for their physical health that they'll do in their phys ed class this year. They won't read the books that their English teacher wants to read with them this year, and so on and so forth. So school serves this unique role, and sometimes we get too grandiose about school. We want it to do everything for our students, and I get that. I get the heart behind that, but ultimately, school has this one fundamental job: help young people to master things as best they can that outside of school they wouldn't master, because this will lead them to long-term flourishing. It'll enable them to have choices in their life that if you don't master these things, you just won't have those choices. So the problem is that word mastery, because mastery can't be done to a person. I can't make a student master world history or English. Those are the classes that I've taught in my career. I can't make them master those things. In order for a student to master anything in any class, they have to do work with care. They have to do work with care. Those are the two ingredients to getting better at anything. You have to do work, of course, it needs to be the right kind of work. And you have to do it with care, with like, I'm doing this for me. I'm doing this for my growth. I'm doing this because I opt to do this, not because someone is telling me that I have to. And this is why student motivation is so important. So I'd like to ask teachers at this point, what are some things that you've done in your class that you've seen help kids to care, help students to want to do the work of learning, whether you teach science or social studies or modern business. What are some things that you've seen that work? And I asked teachers this, and I've asked teachers this around the country, and I don't know, probably I've heard 1,000 different answers to this, all things that work, all things that help with student motivation. And it's made it very clear to me that we as educators don't lack ideas. We don't lack observational data about how student motivation works. What we lack is clarity about how student motivation works. And I'm focused on the United States right now, we suffer exactly what Greg McKeown describes in his book, Essentialism. When there's a lack of clarity, people waste time and energy on a trivial many. And I think that so many of our classes have so much, there's so much good intention from teachers. There's so much hard work from teachers, but there's just so much wasted time. There's so much time spent chasing the trivial, time spent losing energy on stuff that doesn't deserve energy because we're not clear on what the heck we're doing, Everest, or how motivation works. So motivation, in my research, in my experience, in my conversation with teachers around the country, in my book, comes down to 5 key beliefs. When students believe these 5 things in a class, they are going to tend to want to do the work of learning and want to do it with care. If they don't believe one or more of these things, they're going to tend to be resistant to doing the work of learning, and they're going to tend to not care about it. So credibility, value, effort, and efficacy, and belonging. And I'm going to unpack each one of these briefly during our talk today. And also, as I'm going through them, share the things that teachers tend to miss. So we're going to build up from the bottom. This is a pyramid on purpose. If you don't have credibility, good luck building value and the ones above it. If you don't have value, good luck building effort and efficacy in the heart of a student. If you don't have effort and efficacy, good luck building and keeping belonging. Okay, so let's just dive in. Let's dive into credibility right out of the gate. So this one, I didn't invent this. I didn't invent any of these. I've just found these in the research and kind of given an organizational way of thinking about them. But none of these are like Dave Stewart's magical idea that he came up with on his whiteboard. So credibility is from John Hattie's meta-analytical work, Invisible Learning, and that is the largest educational research endeavor ever to take place. So far, no one has conducted research in education that represents more students, that is more statistically significant than John Hattie's huge visible learning meta-analysis. And in that meta-analysis, John Hattie finds that this goofy sounding concept of credibility is one of the most predictive things of student achievement. And I say it's goofy sounding because, I mean, this sounds cheesy. Credibility is when a student believes that you're a good teacher. If a student believes that you're a good teacher, John Hattie finds they're like twice as likely to experience significant growth as a student who thinks that you're just okay or is bad. And I just think that sounds ridiculous. If they believe in you, they'll do better. But that is what John Hattie finds, and he is not a ridiculous person. So what do people tend to miss when it comes to credibility? Well, first of all, people tend to underestimate the degree to which they are constantly sending signals. You are all the time emanating from your actions, from your facial expressions, from your classroom, from your lesson design, from the assignments that you give, the way that you give those assignments, the way you prepare students for those assignments, the small little conversations that you have. All of your actions and non-actions are sending signals to your students. And what your students are doing as human beings is just collecting those signals, often beneath their consciousness, and coming to conclusions based on those signals. And again, those conclusions are often beneath your consciousness. There we go. There's thing number one. And it's this idea that you're signal sending all the time. So there's very rarely like a neutral or a moment, I should say, a moment when you're not sending a signal. Easy to miss thing number two is so thing number one is kind of like we can underestimate how influential we can be on credibility. Easy to miss thing number two is that credibility doesn't need to be this complicated or scary thing. Basically comes down to what I call CCP in my book. That's care, competence, and passion. And again, this is not like me inventing this. This is me taking a bunch of research on credibility and just reducing it down to make it as simple as possible. So essentially, with CCP, care, competence, and passion, you can grade yourself right now. Think about an individual student who's currently demotivated. Let's do that. And you can ask yourself, okay, in the last week, how many times have I intentionally sent this student a signal that I care about them as a person? How many times have I sent this student a signal that I care about them as a learner? In terms of competence, how many times has a student seen me have difficulty managing my class? How many times have they seen me disorganized? How many times have they seen me make a mistake on the board? How many times have I acted annoyed because the class was difficult to deal with? These are the types of questions that you can come up with based on this little chart in front of your face. And you can really quickly do some math and figure out, oh, shoot, not very many times that I've sent these strong signals. Oh, shoot, not very many times, or sorry, too many times that I've sent these negative signals. Passion, there's another one. Is how many times has this student seen me not seem like I have a plan at the start of class? How many times have I gotten to the end of class and there's 5 minutes left and I don't know what to do with my students, and so I just let them do whatever? Those are things that will hurt your passion. So on one hand, CCP is very, very simple. You can print one of these out and you can assess yourself with great accuracy every day to see if you're helping or hurting your credibility. But on the other hand, it's very convicting, because I've never met a teacher who's honest and self-aware who doesn't realize, shoot, I have sent out some bad signals today. There was that kid that I was kind of short with. There was that kid that annoyed me, and I think they could tell. There was that one, third hour where class started a little bit rough, and I was kind of running around with my hair on fire for a minute. And those things were signals about my credibility, signals about how good I am at teaching, and they were not necessarily good. So what you want with CCP is just to focus on sending more positive signals than negative signals. That's step one. And step two is to, ever as you go, increase the positive to negative ratio. Make that positive higher, that negative lower. And if you do this over time, you will just be credible to most of your students, kind of without even attempting to be so. You can habituate positive signal sending. I promise. It's learnable, it's practicable, it's improvable. And if you intend to improve at CCP, you will. Last thing that's easy to miss is that oftentimes we as teachers can get enamored of teachers on the internet, TPT salespeople, maybe YouTubers, book authors. And we can start to think, man, if I could just teach like them, if I just taught in their school, if I just taught with their curriculum, if I just taught that grade level, then I could do what they do. What almost all the resources on the internet and in print don't tell you is that the things these teachers do, if these things work, if they truly work, and I think, there's very few bad actors, like total liars in education. Most people are telling the truth. They're trying to do well. So let's assume that the latest PD book that you read, it's all true. Okay. What they will often not tell you is that they are doing a bunch of little tiny boring things that make them credible to their students. They're credible teachers. And as a result of their credibility, the things that they do tend to work extra good. If you're not credible, then you will have a hard time making these strategies work. So if you want to go and use Penny Kittle and Kelly Gallagher's techniques, or Matthew Kay's techniques, or Jim Burke's, and you're an English teacher, okay, great. But if you're not credible, if you're not sending CCP signals to each individual student on a regular basis, it's not going to work as well for you as it does for them, because I guarantee that they do those things. Let's move into value. So value is much less in your control. That's what's hard about value. It's also, I think, what's kind of fun. It's kind of fun. Value is all about a student believing that this work, the work that they're doing in my class, the work they're doing in your class, that it actually matters. It's worth their time. And the thing that's hard about value, I mean, one of many things that's hard, is that there's just a lot of ways that you can come to value a thing that you're doing. There's a lot of different ways. So this rainbow of why here is, again, me taking all the different value words in the research that I've found and putting them in like one place. And I've kind of arranged them. There's a little bit of a rhyme to my reason here. I don't need to get into that. But for our next point, I will get into it. So basically, the easy to miss idea for value, the first easy to miss idea for value, is that teachers tend to really, really quickly jump to, well, this assignment matters, this work matters because you're going to use it someday, or it's related to your life. So utility or relevance, we tend to super focus here. Okay. And it's not totally bad. Like utility is not bad. I want there to be things I'm doing in my class sometimes that will be useful for my students tomorrow. That's great. The problem is that the older kids get, the less likely it is that what they're doing in our class is going to be used outside of our class, because our classes become so specialized. So like world history, it's just not many times when I can really make the case, oh yeah, you're going to for sure use the fact that land-based empires were led by rulers who used religion, art, and architecture to legitimize their rule. That's not got a lot of utility. That's not got a lot of relevance. Now, it does start to get interesting, though, when you zoom out a little bit and realize, okay, one way to value things is autonomy, having power over your own life. Well, can you have power over your own life if you're being manipulated by someone else? Do you truly have power over your own life if you're being manipulated? We could have a good debate about that, but I'm just going to say, no, you can't have total power over your life if you're being manipulated. Well, one way that rulers can tend to manipulate their subjects, or that politicians can manipulate their voters, is by linking themselves with large feats or religious themes or ideas. That's kind of like what we're studying in world history right now. So there, I'm not saying, hey, this is something that you care about today. This is something you're going to use tomorrow. But I'm saying, hey, watch out. People still use these techniques to control. And if you want to be uncontrolled as a person, you got to learn to look out for them. Now, I do want to point out that I think it's an honest mistake that we tend to overuse utility and relevance, because in the United States, we don't typically care about learning just for learning's sake. We don't come to learning as adults because it is meaningful. For example, this is a Pew Forum survey from 2018 that indicates when adults had a chance to free write about what gave them a sense of meaning in life, very, very few, 1 in 10, said that learning gave them a sense of meaning in life. But you'll notice a ton said family, that's relevance, career, that's utility, relevance, money, that's utility, that's autonomy. So most people are not thinking, oh, I'm going to go to school just because learning is fun and I love learning and learning is super cool and it's beautiful. No, they're mostly going to school so that it can connect them with the things, it can help them with the things that they actually do find deeply meaningful and beautiful, things like family, career, money. So what I'm saying here is that I get why we are so quick to overuse utility and relevance. But what I'm also saying is, don't just use those because I think, well, I'll let Charlotte Mason tell you what I think. Charlotte Mason was writing 100 years ago, more than that, in Great Britain. And she basically says you need to know a lot of ways to help motivate a child, but don't use just one set of motives because you'll injure the child's character. And I think that a lot of our students have been injured by us constantly arguing when they're going to use the class someday, how the class is relevant to their life. Because I think what we've done is we've communicated to the students that there's nothing bigger than you in this world. It's all about you. And so if a class approaches you in high school and you can't find a real world use for that class, you don't need to care about that class. That class is an affront to your dignity as a person. That class is a crime against your humanity. Basically, that's an impoverished way to view the world. You want to view the world as, yes, you are important. You have value. There are things that you care about. You do need to care about things that are useful, but also there's so much more. English language arts, science, social studies is about these whole beautiful domains that apart from those classes, you won't get to access. They're beautiful. There is just a sense of community that comes from studying world history together and having debates about world history and struggling to learn hard material. It's meaningful. It's beautiful. It taps you into something bigger than yourself, and that in and of itself is valuable and worthwhile. So don't overuse utility and relevance, colleague. Please, I want you to go harder in the future at things like beauty. And to help with that, I'm going to let Caroline Ong give you a little example of a beauty approach, a beauty-based approach, a multicolored approach to speaking about the value of a math class.
All right, we're going to look at 2 examples. These are, you're going to need to add these to your notes. Let's say I have, let's see who we have. We have AJ, so point A over here, and we have Colton, so point C over here, and we are going to scale this up. They are 10 miles apart. Okay, and then we have, this is on giving a vast lecture, so we're going to call this point O. And from AJ's point of view, this angle is 45 degrees. And from Colton's point of view, this angle is 35 degrees. I would like to find this side right here, which I'm going to call X. How far am I from AJ? Okay, so we could actually act this out. Okay, we could force Colton and AJ to run in opposite directions until they are 10 miles apart. And then I would adjust my position until the, angles are appropriate. And then we could do a physical measurement of the distances. Is that efficient?
No.
Okay, mathematics allows us to solve problems very efficiently. Mathematicians, absolutely, Kale. Mathematicians are lazy. We want to find the most efficient way to solve a problem. Okay, that's one of the beauties of mathematics is we're looking for the most efficient way to solve a problem. You guys, okay, I'm going to get on my math is wonderful high horse for just a second. Life is about finding the most efficient ways to solve problems. You guys are going to go out, you're going to grow up one day, right? You're not going to, Travis and I were talking about this morning, you're not going to be a teenager forever. And you're going to go out and have some sort of life calling, and it's going to be about solving problems. Maybe you're solving building problems and you're an architect. Okay, maybe you're solving special education problems and you're a teacher. Life is about solving problems. And it's not just about solving problems, it's solving problems in an efficient way. And it is solving problems in a way that other people can use and communicating your solution method to others. All things we do in math. Math is beautiful. Okay, so we are not going to make a scale diagram of this. We're not going to make AJ and run and so forth. Is it a right triangle? Maybe. Do you know this?
Wow, did you catch all that? Wasn't that a thing of wonder and beauty? It sure was. Notice all the different colors that Caroline is painting with, and notice how good it felt just to be in her classroom for a couple of minutes. Now, there's one other idea. Easy to miss idea number 3 for value. Then we'll move on. And it's this sense that you want, it's, sometimes teachers used to ask me, well, who should be creating the value in the class, the value belief in the class? Is it the teacher or the students? And the answer is yes, it's both. You want the teacher to be doing things like we just watched Caroline do. That was teacher generated signal sending about value. That was Caroline saying, this is why my class matters. So the cool thing about teacher generated approaches is that they are way more in your control. You just have to remind yourself to do it. You got to get in the habit of doing it, doing a little mini sermon, I call it in my book. Okay. The problem is that once the student leaves Caroline's class, it's not like that sense of valuing math is going to perfectly transfer. And if the student encounters, let's say, a very grumpy, angry at life, bitter math teacher next year for a whole year, then the student may lose their sense of valuing math. But I'm sure that Caroline also gives her students regular attempts to generate their own reasons for valuing math. And the easy way to do this is to ask your students sometimes, hey, why is math worth studying? I met a phys ed teacher once in Utah who every year in his phys ed classes on the day of parent teacher conferences, he would say to his students after they stretched for the day, hey, I'm going to get a parent, at least one parent tonight, who's going to say, phys ed is stupid. My kid doesn't need this. Give me your best arguments that you would use if you had a chance to try to convince this parent otherwise. Well, what you do when you put your students in the position of make the case for this class is you help them to brainstorm, to generate, to be creative about the value of your class without you saying a thing. So you want to do both of those things. And that's easy to miss. Most teachers err on one side or the other. They're too student generated with value or they're too teacher generated with value. Okay, next let's shift into effort and efficacy, the twins, the twinners. Effort and efficacy are tied together because it's sort of like, well, I'm going to be more successful. My success is going to be influenced by the degree to which I put forth smart effort, but also I need to understand what success even is in order for me to know how to put forth good effort and believe my effort. So the best way I've found to represent this is what I call the effort efficacy flywheel. And so this is what is often happening in the heart of a student who is well motivated in the sense of effort and efficacy. First of all, they know what good effort looks like and they're putting it forth. Second of all, because they know what good effort looks like, they tend to get better results and they know what even better results means. What is a better result? And then finally, they start to attribute their success to the wise effort. But what many demotivated students are caught in is what I call the effort efficacy doom loop. So this is where there's maybe bad effort taking place or there are poor results that are happening. And then there's this attribution where, well, when you do effort, it doesn't actually help you. So now you start to be super demotivated. And even if you value the class, you're still going to be demotivated. You know what I mean? That's why it's on top. You can still value the class for a minute, but if you just keep getting caught in that doom loop, then it's not going to last for long. So the easy to miss idea, number one, for effort and efficacy is that no matter how old your students are, you need to teach them how to do everything. This should obviously not be in a demeaning way or like a, hey, you guys are stupid way. Never would want to do that. But it's kind of more in this John Wooden way. So John Wooden, famous UCLA basketball coach who was his teams won so many games at one point that, commentators were like, moaning about how he was ruining college basketball. It was broken. He broke college basketball because his teams were so good. But I love this, common like legendary story of John Wooden where he says, yeah, the first day of practice every year, we've got these nationally recruited like best basketball players in the country, maybe the world for their age group. And I would always take time to teach them how to put in their socks and shoes. And he describes it at length. Like you can pause this video and look at this description here. This is from Newsweek. Like it's an incredibly detailed description and the type of detail that can only come from having done this many, many times with great thoughtfulness. So John Wooden did not miss this idea. Obviously, if he's teaching college basketball players to put in their socks and shoes, he has deeply internalized the fact that you've got to teach everything. And the reason you've got to teach everything is because of this piece of the flywheel right here. If you start to assume that your students, no matter what class you teach, that they know how to put forth wise strategic effort, if you start to make that assumption, then you're going to have huge variation in student results and massive motivational issues in the level of effort, efficacy, and belonging to. So instead, you just need to efficiently teach the things that you expect students to do. And I often like to ask teachers, hey, brainstorm. What are all the learning conducive behaviors that you wish your students did? You know that your students need to do these things. And why don't you just go ahead and clump these into smallies, stuff that could be taught in 5 minutes and then just reinforced, and biggies, stuff that, yeah, it makes sense. Like your students are gonna have to work on this a bunch. So I have, some examples here of smallies and biggies, like for my ninth grade students. Taking good notes. That's a biggie. That's gonna need a lot of reinforcement, a lot of instruction, a lot of modeling, a lot of examples, non-examples for kids to get good at that because like there's so many cognitive processes going on when we take notes. How to study, same thing. It's gonna take a lot. It's gonna take a lot. But these things like capitalizing the first person pronoun, that's something that for me in my class, that's like a socks and shoes thing. Unfortunately, my students do need to have a quick little touch base on, hey, why do we do basic elementary conventions every time that we write, no matter what we're writing? Why do we always make sure that we do that? So we'll talk about that, discuss that, and I'll make sure that they understand how to do it. And then I just have to reinforce it after. So don't miss this. Don't miss this idea that just because your students are in 10th grade or 7th grade or 4th grade, they don't need to be taught how to do maybe something they learned in 1st grade again, briefly, respectfully, clearly, with modeling and reinforcement. The next thing that's easy to miss in this area is that students don't understand success very well. I find that in the average student mind, there is one of two definitions of success. There's either the definition that success is when I get an A or a certain grade. And so that definition is pretty toxic for all the kids. Um, if especially if it's like I have to get 100% a straight A, that's just gonna start to make them feel very disempowered, very anxious when they get into harder classes. So that's definition number one that's common in students. And definition number two would be like just passing my classes. I teach high school, so if I'm just passing my classes. So in fact, I think the best definition of success is that I am growing towards mastery. I'm growing towards mastery. But the thing is, I have to articulate this a bunch to my students. What do I mean by that in my classes? And I need my students to articulate to themselves, what does that look like through things like goal setting and reflecting on how a test went versus how they hoped it would go, and so on. So I get very, very specific in the book on like how to do these things, but just don't miss the fact that most of your students don't have a clear sense of success. And if you don't do anything about that, then that's going to hurt their efficacy, because efficacy is I can succeed at this. And if my definition of success is really vague and fuzzy and ungraspable, then how do I know that I can? uh, Easy to miss idea number three for effort and efficacy is that the day after a test is very, very fertile. Many people, many teachers, great teachers will teach these amazing units, and then the unit will end, and then they'll just move on. And I get it. Half the time, more than half the time, me as a teacher, I'm so ready for the next unit by the time it comes. I'm like, whew, thank goodness. Let's talk about something else. Let's wrestle with something else. My students are typically the same way. But man, if you could just take like 10 minutes at the start of that class, the first day of the next unit, the new unit, and have the students reflect on how did the assessment go? How did the performance task go? How did it go? How did you hope it would go? How it went compared to how you hoped it would go? What did you do to get this result? Basically, ask them to reflect on the effort that went into the work that they did. Ask them to reflect on the results that they got, whether or not they interpret those as successful. Does not take more than 10 minutes to have a little free write in response to some prompts, and then maybe a little quick think, pair, share. And you really will get a lot of bang for your buck from doing something like that. And last, we have belonging right on the top here. People like me do work like this. And this is my last one, my last easy to miss idea for belonging. And it's basically that students who struggle tend to always believe it's just them. That their struggle is unique to them, that they are uniquely stupid, unprepared, ill-fitting to the class. This is super, super common. I mean, it's kind of how anti-belonging works. So in my book, I describe anti-belonging as like a little hamster on a wheel in the back of your head. And when you're not sure that you belong in a class, like let's say across the hallway, there's an AP calculus teacher, and he's a great math teacher, but he teaches in a very demanding, cognitively challenging way. And many students who are sitting in the class quietly will hear another student offer an answer that they couldn't come up with, and they'll start this little hamster on the wheel. And the hamster's looking around at everything that happens. They're like, "Oh, that kid just said an answer, and I didn't know that answer. I don't fit here. I don't belong. I'm the dumb kid in class. Oh, the teacher called on that student over there, not me. It's because he knows that I don't fit. I don't belong. I'm not smart here." So that this hamster wheel starts happening, and it basically affects two things. One, it affects your cognitive abilities because you have a piece of your working memory that's like obsessing over these signals and what they say about your belonging. So it kind of hinders you. It hinders you. And then the other part is that it just hurts with belonging because anti-belonging is very isolating. So what you can do is just ask your students after an activity that you suspect was challenging, ask them, hey, raise your hand if you felt at least 1% blank during that challenge that we just did as a class. So during the debate that we just had, who felt at least 1% nervous before they spoke? Something like that. And then when you get most hands go up because 1% is a very low threshold, you tell students, look around. It was normal in that environment, in that situation we just did in that challenge. It was actually normal to experience nervousness or uncertainty or, self-loathing, whatever you say. That was the normal experience. Most students struggled with that. The weirdos are the ones who did it. So that's strategy 10 in my book. It's called Normalizing Struggle, and it's very important because struggle, when we just leave it be, tends to be ambiguous. Is this just me? Am I uniquely ill-suited for this place, or is this common? So we've looked at 10 easy to miss ideas for student motivation, things that I find many teachers don't pay enough attention to. And I get it. I totally get why. There's a million things that we have to pay attention to in a day. This job is very difficult and challenging, so I totally understand. But at the same time, paying attention to these things will free you up over time to be able to focus more on the stuff that really matters. It will increase the power of your lessons. I always used to tell teachers when I started to work on studying student motivation, I'm basically studying this because I'm kind of at my peak in terms of lesson design. I realize I'm always only going to be about average when it comes to designing a good lesson, when it comes to designing a good course. Like I'm just kind of average there, and I'm okay with that because I think average is like I want to be good, not the best at those things. But man, if I could just figure out how to cultivate 10% more motivation in my students, help them to care 10% more, now all of a sudden my average lessons are being multiplied up and they're getting the impact of someone who's way better at lesson planning or unit design than me. And what if I could get student motivation up 20%, 30%? And so that's That's kind of my approach. Why I care about this, why I think about this, because I mean, and also just from a compassion standpoint, from a parent who has children that he loves, who knows how hard it is as a parent to watch your kids struggle with motivation, um, to like not want to do something, but just like have to sit there and grind it out. Um, I want my students to have an enjoyable, productive time in my class. I want them to be able to enjoy school. I don't want school to be grindier than it already is, to be more frustrating than it absolutely needs to be. And motivation is a big, helpful lubricant in that machine. It makes the machine run better when you as a student, care to improve yourself because it's something that you value, it's something that you know is possible. Uh, you're just going to find school much more tolerable. And I want that for all of our kids. So, this is my kind of contact info, how you can be in touch with me. Happy to talk with you more about any of these things. But I have been Dave Stewart Jr., and I wish you well, colleague. Take care.